Hello, cruel, cruel world. My name is Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. You can call me the ominous Shahamanist. This video is 5 myths about cults. I'm going to dispel some of them. I'm going to explain some of the psychological tactics that cult leaders use, plus some of their own personality traits. I'm going to tell you about a horrific example of a cult that was revealed very recently. There's been news articles about it this year, 2024, that's linked to well over 409 deaths. I'm going to do a video within a video because I'm going to answer the question, did Andrew Tate create a cult? And I'm going to tell you about another example of a well-known cult called Nexium. Okay, let's cue the intro. As always, I'm going to try and give all of y'all some stats about cults. We both know you're a bit of a geek and you love stats. Not easy to find them on cults, but I got you. So cult leaders prey on the vulnerable. A study by the International Cultic Studies Association, I'm not making this up, the ICSA, found out that over 70% of former cult members reported joining during a period of personal crisis or major life change. Financial exploitation is common. So a survey by the National Association of Attorney Generals, the NOG, found that 78% of cult members reported financial problems as a result of their involvement in their cult. Okay, enough foreplay, let's get into those myths. Myth number 1 about cults. Cults are a thing of the past, they're historical, they're something that's way back when, we don't have to worry about them. Come on man, I literally dispelled this myth in the intro, so pay attention. Cults continue to exist and evolve, and they find new ways to exploit vulnerable people. So I mentioned a recent news story from this year, 2024, involving a cult leader. His name was Paul Mackenzie. He was the leader of the Good News International Church in Kenya, and he's been accused of murder and child torture charges related to the deaths of 429 people. Now, obviously, there's nothing funny about that, so I'm going to turn my joke meter down. These bodies were found buried on the church property east of the country in Kenya. I don't care how good your PR agency is, you can't say that that's good news. So allegedly, Mackenzie told followers to starve themselves to meet Jesus before the end of times, and then exhumations over several months revealed 191 of the deceased were actually children. Mackenzie appeared in court alongside 30 other followers facing murder charges. He was arrested in April 2023. At the time of recording this, the trial is still ongoing. Police and prosecutors alleged that apart from starvation, some victims were strangled, they were suffocated, they were beaten to death with blunt objects. So a little bit of background to that, frankly, quite morbid case. The Good News International Church was set up in Malindi and it was closed down in 2019. Then its leader moved to Shakahola in a forest about 43 miles west of the town. Initially, the worshippers would go and travel there, do their prayers, and then they would return home. But from late 2022, the followers claimed that they were not allowed to leave. It gets pretty dark, as if it wasn't already. The women were repeatedly R-worded, I'm not going to say the word, but it rhymes with schmaped or schmexually by the guards. And those that lived in the forest were literally given half a cup of tea and 1 slice of bread in the morning, and that's all they had to eat for the whole day. Some of the victims said that they would sneak into the bush and they would pick on berries to eat just to stay alive when the guards took their meal breaks. They would also scoop water from the ground and drink it with their hands because of dehydration. They were forbidden to chat in groups. They were required to to stay silent. And then when they escaped, it was similar in that they waited for the guards to take their meal break. They closed the door to their mud-walled hut and they made a hole in the rear wall, and then they ran away. And even though they reportedly were exhausted and emaciated, they were so desperate that they just pushed on through and managed to escape. So luckily they got to a main road where a motorist took them to hospital. Hundreds were obviously not as lucky, including many children. This is the bit of the story that kind of gets bizarre, is that young men, when they found out what was going on, young men from the nearby village went with a plan to storm the area on their motorbikes. They were met with aggression, violence, hostility. They had a little fight with the guards. They had 2 of their motorbikes set on fire. So it became apparent that they couldn't deal with this. They're not the A-team. So they had to go back under police escort. But apparently it was quite an effort. It was quite slow to actually get the police on board to do anything. And during the rescue efforts, according to one witness from what I've researched, some people were frail, they looked like they would die within hours. And this is the bit that's fascinating to me. Some people were stronger, but they refused to be helped. So they were actually resisting the rescuers. They were asking questions like, and I quote, "Why are you disturbing us when we want to go and see Jesus? Why are you telling us we're going to die of starvation? Won't you die one day?" So it really shows the degree of brainwashing. Okay, let's move on from that frankly quite harrowing story. Myth number 2 about cults is that cult leaders are mentally ill. Now, I suppose you can make the argument that any serious offender, whether it's a terrorist, whether it's a P word, whether it's a serial killer, they lack empathy, right? And they're willing to, exploit other people for their own needs. So you could argue that that is mental illness. And I suppose that comes back to the age-old question: what's the definition of a mental illness? If you're a layperson, you might think it's just that. The psychiatric definition as a forensic psychiatrist would be a recognisable mental illness like bipolar. Go check out my 5 myths on bipolar, like schizophrenia, symptoms, hearing voices, etc., etc. The legal definition, which I guess is probably the most important when we're talking about disposal in court cases, is whether they knew what they were doing or if they knew what they were doing was wrong, right? So clearly, I can't see a situation, I can't see any kind of scenario where a cult leader didn't know what they were doing was wrong. So they're not mentally ill, but I think we can all agree, despite how you define it, that they have certain characteristics, right? So here is a list of common personality traits in cult leaders. Common personality trait number 1 in cult leaders is that they're often charismatic and influential, but beneath the charm lies this web of manipulation, controlling behaviours and deceit. Connected to that, they have high degrees of charm and persuasiveness. So they can actually be incredibly captivating and magnetic. They're good at drawing people in with their strong personalities and their passionate beliefs. When you think about it, my personal trainer, it took them months to convince me to do intermittent fasting. But Paul McGenna, the religious leader of the cult in Kenya, was very persuasive. He managed to convince people to move away from their own house and to stop eating so that they could see Jesus. Personality trait number 2 for cult leaders is that they're authoritarian and they're controlling. So they crave power, they crave control over their followers, they dictate other people's beliefs and their behaviours, and they also access their information, which I'll come back to. Personality trait number 3 of cult leaders is they're narcissistic and self-absorbed. They have this grandiose sense of purpose. They have an inflated self-importance and believe in themselves. So they think that they're in some way superior than the average person, or they even believe that they are the chosen one. By the way, some people have accused me of being narcissistic and self-absorbed. It's not true, I'm just awesome. Character trait number 4 of cult leaders is they're pathological liars and they're deceptive. So they readily manipulate the truth to serve their own agenda and to control the narrative. And connected to that, they're quite exploitative. So they exploit their followers emotionally, financially, physically, sexually to serve their own needs or to maintain control. Character trait number 5 in cult leaders is they tend to be unpredictable and their behaviour tends to be erratic. Now, this is not just a noticeable sort of passive trait. They actually do this on purpose, so it actually helps them. They're intentional with their erratic behaviour. Why? Because it keeps their followers kind of second guessing and off balance. And that reinforces the victim's dependence on their leader for guidance, and it also increases the degree of fear and confusion, and they're less likely to leave basically if they don't know what's going on. Personality trait number 6 of cult leaders is that they lack empathy or remorse. So they show little concern for the well-being of their followers. They prioritise their cult agenda above all else. So my Psych for Sore guys and gals, don't cancel me. If you're a regular viewer of a Psych for Sore guys, first of all, welcome. But have you been paying attention? Because if you've watched my other videos, you should recognise that these personality traits are directly linked to, sorry, say again? Yeah, that's right, psychopathy. So that's exactly what psychopaths are, aren't they? They're charming, they're manipulative, they're egotistical, they're narcissistic. So if you're interested in psychopathy in general, you should go and watch my other videos. I'll put the links in the description, specifically a video of the difference between sociopaths and psychopaths. Always be plugging. So yeah, go chiggity check it out if you want to know about psychopaths. I've even done 5 myths about psychopaths in 2 parts, so 10 myths. If you're being technical, geez. Okay, When I was making this video, when I was kind of listing those things in my research, I couldn't help but think about Andrew Tate, who has a lot of those characteristics. So that kind of led me to the ultimate question: was Andrew Tate's online operation a cult? And my honest answer is that there's no definitive conclusion, because it depends how you define cult. So here are some accusations of why Andrew Tate did have cultish behaviour. There was definitely controlling behaviour. The critics point to his online course, The Real World, formerly known as Hustlers University, as fostering a sense of dependence and isolation. They claim it used sort of manipulative tactics to keep members paying, cashing up their hard-earned cash for courses, subscribing to his ideology. Number two reason that you could say that Andrew Tate had cultish behaviour was leader worship. So some of his followers displayed a strong sense of loyalty and admiration for Andrew Tate, bordering, I would say, on idolization. So to be specific, when he was banned from certain platforms like Twitter or X, as it's now called, his own followers would retweet his previous viral videos. So even though he was off the platform, his material was strong. Number three reason why you could say that Andrew Tate had a cult was he garnished a us versus them mentality, a narrative portraying himself and his followers as superior to any of those who disagree with his views. And the fifth and final reason why you could argue that Andrew Tate had a cult was exploitation. So some former members alleged that there was this private bit called the War Room, which is Tate's high-priced inner circle membership, which exploited members financially. For counterbalance, here are some reasons to argue against Andrew Tate exhibiting cultish behaviour. Number one, there was a lack of physical isolation. So unlike traditional cults, Andrew Tate's operation primarily existed online, so members were not physically isolated from the outside world like they were in the Kenyan church thing that I was talking about. But I suppose the counter argument, how many counters have we got, is that the world is changing, and you could say that our identity is increasingly more online, even if it's not physical. It's like a social or a character isolation, not a physically restraintive one. So this might be hard for some people, especially older viewers, to get your heads around, but let's put it like this. I'm 45 years old, right? When I was a kid, the concept of online bullying, there wasn't an internet, but even when the internet started, the concept of online bullying didn't make sense, because you just sort of say, well, turn off your computer. But it's not as simple as that, is it? Because, as I said, your identity, a lot of your social life now for kids is all tied up in this thing. So in the same way you can be socialized, isolated online, I believe, it's just a new concept. When I was a kid, didn't believe in online bullying. I was just waiting for my goddamn hoverboard. Back to the Future 2, you lied to me. Number two argument against why Andrew Tate had a cult was that it was mostly a focus on a business model. So that was the core aspect of Tate's operation, was online courses, memberships. So it's more of a business than religious ideology. Number three reason why you could say Andrew Tate didn't have a cult was that there's no evidence of violence. There's no instances of physical coercion associated with his operation. Of course, everybody knows there's accusations against him, people trafficking, abuse now, but that was separate to what he was doing with his online maybe cult, maybe not cult thing. By the way, if you're interested in Andrew Tate, I've done another video on why I think he's so popular, not just his personality, but why, external factors of why this kind of momentum's gone behind him, why he became so popular. I will put the links in the description, always be plugging, go check it out. So, did Andrew Tate actually have a cult? I appreciate that I've been skating around the answer like a spotty, cross-eyed kid about to ask the pretty girl to the prom dance, but I generally don't believe there's an answer for this question because the definition of a cult is so vague. I believe it's an unanswerable question like, what is the meaning of life? Is free will an illusion? And why was the postman pulling up his trousers? And why was your mother so flustered that time when you came home early from school when you were a kid? Myth number three about cults. Once you're in a cult, there's no escape. So in reality, many people have successfully left cults. There are in fact support groups, resources available to help people who want to leave. And I'm going to get into the specific psychological tricks that cult leaders use in a later myth, but because it makes sense to talk about it now, let's discuss isolation. So damaging your social connections makes it really difficult to leave. So that's one of the factors that keeps people in. In fact, I've been involved in a fascinating Channel 4 documentary, a real-life person of a woman called Katie, who was born into a cult because her own father, called Aravind Balakrishnan was the leader of the cult. So she's been in it since she was a kid. She escaped at the age of 30. It was kind of like this Maoist collective. And it's pretty dark, the life that she lived up until that point. She was never sent to school. She was never allowed to see a doctor. She was isolated from the outside world. In fact, her escape started because she was able to sneak in a mobile phone and call this helpline. But anyway, go chiggity, check it out. I analyse how she managed to outsmart her father and other members of the cult and ultimately escape. I'll put the links in the description. Always be plugging. Okay, moving on. Almost there. Home stretch. You can do it. Get your back into it. I can do it. Get my ass into it. Myth number 4 about cults. Cults always kidnap people and force them to join. I've already kind of mentioned this before, but in reality, while some extreme cases of kidnapping exist, most cults use manipulative tactics like emotional pressure, like social isolation, and control of information to recruit their members. So I know what you're thinking. Your beard looks great, Dr. Das, and I love your general style, but what the hell are you talking about? All right, chill out. I'll give you some specific examples of psychological tactics that cult leaders use. Number 1, they prey on vulnerability. So cult leaders or cult recruiters target people in a time of need. They don't target the employee of the month who just finished a marathon and has just made a perfect souffle. They prey on people who are lonely, who are isolated, who are at their lowest ebb, who are going through a difficult life transition, like they've just been through a massive breakup or a divorce, or they've lost their job, or they've accidentally signed up for another annual membership at David Lloyd, or they're searching for purpose and meaning. And the cult leaders exploit these vulnerabilities to offer that person a sense of like belonging and support when they're feeling fragile. Number 2 tactic used by cult leaders is love bombing. So this shower potential recruits with excessive affection, give them attention, give them praise. It creates a sense of euphoria and it makes the cult feel like a warm, welcoming, safe environment when obviously it's everything but that, but obviously the behavior of the cult leader later changes. Number 4 reason why, or tactic that cult leader might use, is gradual isolation. So cults may decrease distance from friends, from relatives and outside support, and this makes the victim more dependent on their cult for their social needs and also for their emotional well-being. So that, if you create this dependency, it makes it harder to leave. Number 5 tactic that cult leaders use to recruit is controlling information. Well, not to recruit, but also to stop people leaving. So they restrict the members' access to outside information, like watching the news or the media, anything that can challenge the cult's beliefs. So going back to mentioning before about Katie, she was born into this cult. She was 30 when she escaped. So everything that she's ever known is really sort of fed to her by her father, the leader, and the other senior members of this cult. So for example, in the video that I analysed for the Channel 4 documentary, she talks about this mind control machine called Jackie, and she believed that Jackie would move her thoughts. Now, it's easy for some people to think that that's a bit naive, but if that's all you've known, and if you've never been allowed to have any information to the contrary, then it's not naivety, it's literally you don't have any balance of information, I guess. So why do cult leaders do this? It keeps the members within the cult's echo chambers and it reinforces the leader's control. Number 6, I hope I've been losing count, way that cult leaders operate is manipulation and persuasion through charismatic leadership. So they're persuasive figures who can inspire devotion and trust. They use their charm and authority to manipulate. So I'll give you a specific example. They foster intentionally this us versus them mentality. So they portray the outside world as dangerous or corrupt and they themselves as the only safe haven. So they have this narrative, this sense of we're all in this together, and they discourage any questioning of the group or the leader's belief. Connected to that, I think it was a great philosopher, I think it was Socrates, that once said, we've got to hold on to what we've got because it doesn't make a difference if we make it or not. We've got each other, and to be fair, that's a lot for love. We'll give it a shot. Of course, cult leaders, as well as psychological manipulation, they use more brutal and blunt psychological tools. So tool number 1 would be sleep deprivation to weaken a person's critical thinking skills and make them more susceptible to like brainwashing and indoctrination. Brutal tactic number 2 from cult leaders is deception and false promises. So they have these grandiose promises of enlightenment or of wealth if you follow the cult. So the Good News International Church that I talked about before in Kenya promise that the individuals get to take a selfie with Jesus if they starve themselves. Some cults promise followers special knowledge or like hidden truths or a path to wealth and enlightenment, which of course it is all bullshit, and those people who are making those promises are frankly charlatans. But on a completely separate note, if you subscribe to my YouTube channel at Psych for Small Minds, not only does it help me out immeasurably, but it will make you a millionaire and understand the meaning of life, guaranteed all your money back. Before we move on, I'm going to introduce you to a Psych for Small Minds. It's a smorgasbord of videos related to mental illness and offending and the crossover between the two. I'll be doing loads of these myths dispelling videos, so women's prisons, psychopaths, restraining orders, kidnapping. If you're interested in that, go chickadee, check it out. I've got a video on myths about men's mental health. I am a forensic psychiatrist and I assess mentally disordered criminals in courts, in prisons and in psychiatric units. Okay, come on, we can do this, almost there. Myth number 5 about cults is that they're always religious in nature. I kind of brushed on this with Andrew Tate, but I suppose we didn't decide whether he had a cult or not. In reality, cults can be political, or they can be self-help, or they're centered around a charismatic leader, or it can be a specific non-religious ideology. I'm going to give you an example. NXIVM, Nexium, which is pronounced Nexium, was a cult masquerading as a kind of business empire. I'm sorry, but this really gets my donkey. You can't just bend the English language at will. You can't just pull those letters together and say it spells Nexium. Just like you can't say that says Expendables 4. That says Expend 4 Blaise. Anyway, Nexium, I refuse to call it Nexium. Nexium was a self-improvement company that operated from 1998 to 2018. You might have heard of it. It was founded by Keith Raniere and Nancy Salzman, and it offered personal development seminars under the umbrella of Executive Success Programs, ESPs, and Raniere was a central figure, and he was referred to within the group as Vanguard. And let's face it, that's a pretty shit nickname. It's nowhere near as cool as Ominous Shahominous. And this man wielded immense control. So Nexium lured people in with promises of personal growth, leadership, development skills, achieving one potential, all the bullshit that you can get off a lot of YouTubers right now. But there was a dark underbelly beneath it all. So beneath the self-improvement facade, Nexium functioned as a manipulative and abusive cult. It involved a secret sorority within Nexium where women were branded, they were coerced into slave labour, they were pressurised into sexual relationships with Raniere. Members were gradually isolated from their loved ones, subjected to information control. There was also financial exploitation, so Nexium charged exorbitant fees for its program, putting financial strain on its members. So basically, whatever it was on the surface, below it all, it was all a cult. 2017, accusations about its sexual practices surface. The leaders were investigated and arrested. Keith Raniere was convicted in 2020 on charges including schmafficking, sorry, I don't want to say the words because of YouTube, and schmacketeering. In 2021, Nexium entities and their intellectual property were seized by the Department of Justice. So basically, this is all a non-religious cult. Okay, I think we've made it out through to the other end. Well done, boys and girls. You deserve it. Let's very briefly summarise what we've learnt today, kids, and then I'll leave you. So cults are bad. Okay. Andrew Tate may or may not have a cult. Depends on how you define cult. Not all cults are religious. It is possible to escape from cults, and people have done it. I'm still waiting for my hoverboard from Back to the Future 2. And psychological tactics used by cult leaders do not necessarily involve literal, actual, physical restraint. Whew, I feel like I've rambled on for ages there. Okay, that's it. Stay euthymic. Have a blessed day. Buy my goddamn book and do not forget. I love you.